Mate bonds forged by magic are destiny itself. Unbreakable, undeniable, absolute. That's what every kingdom in the frozen north has believed since the first Winter King took his throne. But when you're the one standing before a conqueror who mistakes destiny for ownership, you learn that even ancient magic means nothing against a tyrant's arrogance. The claiming ceremony was supposed to be a formality, a graceful acceptance where Princess Alara would bow to King Valdemar's declaration and become another jewel in his expanding empire. The entire court had gathered to witness it. Warriors in wolf fur cloaks, frost mages with ice in their veins, nobles who had bent the knee to the most feared alpha in 5 kingdoms. But Alara had other plans. Standing on the obsidian floor of Valdemar's throne room, dressed in ceremonial red that seemed to burn against the hall's eternal winter, she felt the mate bond crackling through her blood like wildfire meeting frost. The pull was undeniable, ancient magic that recognized its other half, demanding she submit to the crowned king before her. Every instinct her tutors had drilled into her screamed to bow her head, to accept gracefully, to fade into the role of conquered queen like so many princesses before her. Instead, she raised her hand in the ancient gesture of refusal. I, Alara Vance, bearer of the Phoenix bloodline, she declared, her voice cutting through a frozen air with unnatural heat. Decline your claim, King Valdemar Frostborn. The silence that followed was so complete that the crackling of the ice-blue ceremonial flames sounded like thunder. Even the warriors, hardened men who had burned cities and broken armies, stood frozen in shock. In 3 centuries of northern law, no claimed mate had ever dared to speak those words to a reigning Alpha King. But Alara wasn't finished. The bond may be real, she continued, feeling dangerous warmth spread across her skin as Valdemar's glowing ice-blue eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. But destiny does not mean ownership. I am not a territory to be conquered or a prize to be claimed. I am fire itself. The temperature in the throne room plummeted so fast that several courtiers gasped, their breath turning to mist. King Valdemar rose from his throne, and for the first time in her life, Alara understood why 5 kingdoms had surrendered rather than face him in battle. The crown on his head seemed to darken, the intricate metalwork writhing like living frost. His warriors instinctively stepped back, hands moving to weapons they would never dare draw in their king's presence. You decline. His voice was soft, deadly, each word dropping the temperature another degree. Ice began crystallizing on the marble pillars. No one has declined a royal claim in 300 years. Do you understand what you've just done, princess? The formal title dripped with threat. Alara felt the first real tendril of fear coil around her heart. But beneath it, something else stirred, something hot and wild that had been sleeping in her blood for her entire life. The red dress she wore began to shimmer with heat. I understand perfectly, Your Majesty, she said, and was shocked to find her voice didn't waver. I've just reminded you, it's some fire for Fios to be tamed. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw some big flicker behind the rage in Valdemar's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or even respect. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Then you've also declared war, Valdemar said quietly. Take her to the North Tower. If she wants to burn with her pride, let her freeze. As his warrior moved forward, Alara felt the heat in her blood surge higher. When the first guard reached for her arm, his hand met fabric that shouldn't have been possible. Silk that burned like an open flame. He jerked back with a cry of pain, staring at his reddened palm in disbelief. The throne room erupted into chaos, and Alara realized with dawning horror and exhilaration that whatever had been sleeping inside her had finally woken up. The game between ice and fire had begun. The guard's scream was still echoing off the vaulted ceiling when Valdemar moved. Not toward Alara, but away. His massive frame turning toward the nearest pillar with a violence that made even his most battle-hardened warriors flinch. His fist connected with the marble, and the entire throne room shuddered. Ice exploded outward from the point of impact, not in delicate crystalline patterns, but in jagged, vicious spears that tore through stone like flesh. The pillar cracked with a sound like breaking bones, frost racing up its length until the top half simply shattered, raining frozen debris across the obsidian floor. Alara stumbled backward, heat flaring instinctively across her skin as chunks of ice-coated marble crashed around her. But Valdemar wasn't stopping. He moved to the next pillar, then the next, each strike sending fresh waves of destructive frost magic spiraling through the ancient hall. The ceremonial flames guttered and died, snuffed out by the sudden Arctic cold. 3 centuries, Valdemar snarled, his voice no longer controlled but raw with fury. 3 centuries of northern law, and you, another pillar exploded. You dare? The ornate windows lining the hall began to crack, ice spreading across the glass in violent webs. Courtiers fled toward the exits, but the doors slammed shut with a boom that sounded like a death knell. Beyond the walls, Ilara heard the grinding shriek of the city's massive iron gates closing, followed by the distinctive crack of ice magic sealing them shut. Commander Riker, Valdemar's roar cut through the chaos. A scarred warrior stepped forward, jaw clenched. Seal every exit. No one enters or leaves this city without my explicit command. Yes, Your Majesty. Valdemar finally turned to face Ilara, and she saw something behind the rage that chilled her more than his magic ever could. A desperate, wild thing that wore a crown but was barely human anymore. His chest heaved, and when he spoke, ice crystals formed in the air with each word. You are hereby declared a hostile sovereign, Princess Ilara Vance. His formal tone was a mockery wrapped in frost. You have 3 days to accept your rightful place at my side, or you will face public execution for treason against the Northern Crown. The mate bond between them pulled taut, screaming in protest. Ilara's blood burned hotter in response. And if you think your little fire will save you, Valdemar added, his glowing eyes fixed on her with predatory focus, remember that winter always wins. Fire burns bright, but ice is eternal. He gestured sharply, and 4 guards moved toward her with careful, wary respect, none willing to touch her skin directly. Take her to the North Tower. Let her contemplate eternity. The North Tower lived up to its name. Ilara felt the cold seeping through the stone walls before the guards even finished climbing the spiral stairs, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. They shoved her through the door without ceremony and slammed it shut, the sound of multiple locks engaging echoing in the sudden silence. She was alone. The circular chamber was sparse, a narrow bed with frost-covered blankets, a single window showing nothing but white sky, and walls lined with ancient tapestries so faded they were almost ghostly. This was where Valdemar sent prisoners he wanted to forget slowly, letting the cold do his work for him. Except the cold wasn't working. Ilara pressed her palm against the stone wall and jerked back, not because it was frozen, but because where her hand had rested, the frost had melted, leaving a perfect handprint of bare stone. She stared at her palm, watching steam rise from her skin in the frigid air. Her body temperature was climbing, not the flush of fever or the warmth of exertion, but something deeper, more primal. The red gown she wore, chosen by her attendants for the ceremony because red was the color of submission in Northern tradition, now shimmered with an inner light. The silk rippled as though flames danced beneath the surface. "What's happening to me?" she whispered. Movement caught her eye. One of the tapestries near the window was shifting, not from wind, but from the heat radiating off her body. As the ancient fabric stirred, details emerged from centuries of dust and shadow. Ilara moved closer, her heart hammering. The tapestry depicted a woman wreathed in flames, her arms raised as fire spiraled around her like living ribbons. She wore a crown of golden ember, and her face... Ilara's breath caught. The face was eerily similar to her own. Beneath the image, barely legible text read, Seraphina Vance, the Phoenix Queen, keeper of the eternal flame. Her grandmother. The woman her tutors claimed had died when Ilara's father was young. The woman whose name was never spoken in polite company. Whose portraits had been removed from every royal hall in her homeland before it fell to Valdemar's conquest. The woman who, according to this tapestry, had commanded fire itself. Ilara's hands began to glow with soft red light, and she finally understood why her family had hidden the truth. She wasn't just a princess with a stubborn streak. She was a weapon they tried desperately to keep dormant. And Valdemar had just lit the fuse. A locks disengaged just after midnight, each tumbler falling with deliberate precision. Ilara had been tracing the tapestry's flames with her fingertips, watching them glow brighter under her touch, when the door swung open. Valdemar filled the doorway, like a storm contained in human form. He'd removed his ceremonial armor, but somehow that made him more dangerous, not less. The simple black tunic revealed the brutal lines of muscle beneath, and the crown still sat on his head, a reminder that even in her prison he was king. "Leave us," he commanded, and the 2 guards stationed outside vanished without question. He stepped inside and the temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the floor from his boots, creeping toward her in crystalline fingers. But where it met the heat radiating from Ilara's body, it simply melted into harmless water. His glowing blue eyes tracked the phenomenon with predatory interest. In the dim light, they were almost luminescent, inhuman things that belonged more to a winter spirit than a man. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. "Do you know what happens when a mate bond is rejected, Princess?" Ilara forced herself to meet those glacial eyes. "I imagine the world doesn't end." "No." He moved closer, each step measured, controlled. "But it feels like it should." For the first time, she noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched as though fighting something internal. A fine tremor ran through his massive frame. "The bond pulls," he continued, his voice rougher now, "constantly. Like hooks buried in your chest, trying to drag you toward your other half. When that half refuses you," his eyes flared brighter, and the frost on the walls thickened. "It's like being torn apart from the inside. Every breath is agony. Every heartbeat feels wrong." He stopped just beyond her circle of warmth, and she saw it then. The barely concealed pain tightening his features, the rigid way he held himself, as though one wrong move would shatter his control entirely. "So here's your bargain," Valdemar said, ice forming in his breath. "Accept the bond, end both our suffering, and I'll give you anything you want. Continue this rebellion, and I promise you'll watch everyone you love freeze to death before I finally grant you the mercy of execution." The threat hung in the air between them, cold and absolute. Ilara felt the mate bond pulling at her too, a constant ache that whispered she could end this, could give in, could make the pain stop for both of them. It would be so easy to reach out, to touch his hand, to let destiny have its way. Instead, she lifted her chin and let flames dance across her fingertips. "I don't negotiate with tyrants who mistake pain for permission," she said quietly. "Your suffering doesn't entitle you to my surrender." Something dangerous flickered across Valdemar's face. Rage, yes, but beneath it, something raw. Respect, perhaps, or hatred for the fact that he felt it. "Then you've chosen the hard way." He turned toward the door, frost trailing in his wake. 2 days, Princess. I suggest you spend them wisely." The door slammed shut, and Ilara finally allowed herself to shake. The food arrived at dawn, delivered by a guard she hadn't seen before. He was younger than the others, perhaps only a few years older than Ilara herself, with kind eyes that didn't match the harsh uniform he wore. He set the tray down with careful deliberation, then did something that made her heart skip. He glanced back at the door and moved closer. "Forgive the intrusion, Princess," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I am Lieutenant Kale. I served under your father before the conquest." Ilara's breath caught. Her father had fallen 2 years ago, his kingdom absorbed into Valdemar's growing empire. She'd assumed all his loyalists were dead or converted. "You're taking a terrible risk speaking to me," she said quietly. "The risk is already taken." Kale's hand moved to his belt, and something metallic glinted in the early morning light. A key. He pressed it into her palm before she could protest. "The Southern Servants' entrance. It's rarely guarded after the night watch changes." "Why would you help me escape?" "Because I'm not helping you." His eyes darted to the door again, tension radiating through his frame. "I'm trying to save my king before it's too late." Ilara stared at him. "I don't understand." The frost curse. Kale's voice dropped even lower, barely more than a breath. "It's not just legend. Valdemar's bloodline has carried it for generations, a gift from a winter spirit, his ancestor bound in servitude. The magic gives them power, but demands balance. Without a mate of opposing heat, the ice consumes them from within. The pieces began clicking together in Alara's mind. Valdemar's barely controlled rage. The way frost spread from his touch, even when he wasn't trying. Those inhuman glowing eyes. His father lasted until 40 before he froze completely, Cale continued, becoming the statue of ice in his own throne room. They shattered him and told the kingdom he died in battle. Valdemar is 37, and the cold is taking him faster. He has months, maybe weeks, before he becomes a monster, Ilara finished. Before he becomes a corpse. Cale straightened, his expression hardening into something professional again. You're not just his mate, Princess. You're his only cure. But he's too proud to ask, too broken to admit he's dying. So he threatens and rages, and pretends he's acting from strength when really he's terrified. He moved toward the door, then paused. The key is your choice. Run and he'll hunt you until the ice claims him entirely. Stay, and maybe you can both survive this. But don't stay out of guilt or dibby. Stay because you choose to, or it won't work anyway. The door closed softly behind him, leaving Alara alone with a key that felt heavier than iron and a truth that changed everything. Valdemar wasn't her captor. He was drowning and trying to drag her down with him rather than admit he needed saving. Alara waited until the second night watch, when exhaustion made even trained soldiers careless. The key turned soundlessly in the lock, and the southern servants' corridor stretched before her like a promise of freedom. Her heart hammered as she moved through the darkness, the red gown traded for a stolen cloak that did nothing to contain the heat building beneath her skin. She was 3 turns from the outer gate when she heard the footsteps. Not the heavy tread of regular guards, but the synchronized movement of something far more dangerous. The Frostborn, Valdemar's elite soldiers, men who had survived ritual exposure to the curse's magic and emerged transformed. Their armor gleamed with permanent frost, and their breath came out as ice crystals even in summer. 6 of them materialized from the shadows, blocking both ends of the corridor. Their commander, a massive warrior with eyes that glowed pale blue, drew his sword. Ice formed along the blade's edge. "Princess Alara," he said, voice cold as a winter grave. "The king requests your immediate return." "I'm sure he does." Alara's hands clenched beneath the cloak. The heat in her blood was building, climbing towards something she couldn't control. "Let me pass. That's not going to happen." They advanced in perfect formation, weapons drawn, frost spreading across the floor with each step. Alara backed against the wall, panic rising in her throat. Akit was becoming painful now, her skin too tight, her breath coming in gasps that left steam in the air. "Please," she whispered, "don't make me." The lead Frostborn reached for her, and Alara's world became fire. It erupted from her skin in a shockwave of pure heat, an expanding sphere of flames that turned the darkness into blazing light. She heard metal screaming as it superheated, heard the soldiers shouting in shock and pain. The corridor filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning leather. Then silence. When the flames finally died, Alara fell to her knees, gasping. The Frostborn soldiers lay scattered across the hallway, their armor glowing cherry red and weapons melted into useless slag. But they were alive. Groaning, burned, furious, but alive. Sheetsunghal held back enough to stop short of killing them. The commander pushed himself up on scorched hands, staring at her with something between fear and awe. "By the Froving gods," he breathed. "You're not just a princess. You're a sorceress." Doors began slamming open throughout the castle. The alarm bells rang in the distance. And Alara realized, with cold certainty, that everything had just changed. There would be no more hiding what she was, no more pretending she was just a political pawn. The Phoenix had finally awakened, and the entire kingdom would know by morning. They dragged Alara to the war chamber in chains. Not iron, which would have melted against her skin, but thick, enchanted silver that suppressed magic and burned cold against her wrists. The room was filled with Valdemar's inner circle, generals who had conquered kingdoms, mages who commanded frost and storm, advisors who had bent the world to their king's will. All of them looked at her like she was a threat that needed eliminating. Fire magic. General Thorn slammed his fist on the obsidian table, making the map scatter. In the heart of the frozen north, Your Majesty, this is not coincidence. This is infiltration. The Southern Dukes have sent an assassin disguised as a mate. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled warriors. Elara's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain still, to show no fear, even as they discussed her execution like they were planning a military campaign. She incinerated 6 Frostborn soldiers, another general added. Men who have survived exposure to the curse itself, reduced to helpless children by her flames. If she'd wanted them dead, they would be. We cannot allow such a weapon to remain alive inside these walls. Execute her at dawn, Thorn continued, his scarred face grim. Make it public. Show the Southern Kingdoms what happens to their schemes. No. The single word cut through the discussion, like a blade through silk. Valdemar stood at the head of the table, his hands braced on the dark surface, his glowing eyes fixed on his generals, with an intensity that made even these hardened warriors shift uncomfortably. Your Majesty, Thorn began carefully. With respect, I said no. Valdemar's voice dropped to something dangerous. Frost spread across the table from his palms. She is not a Southern assassin. She is my mate, and she is under my protection. The silence that followed was stunned, absolute. But she attacked your Frostborn, another advisor ventured. She has power that could destroy. She defended herself when cornered? Valdemar interrupted, and there was something almost desperate beneath the authority in his voice. My soldiers attempted to capture her. She responded as any sovereign would when threatened. This does not make her an enemy of the crown. General Thorn stood slowly, his expression carefully neutral. Your Majesty, the bond is clouding your judgment. You declared her a hostile sovereign yourself. You set the execution date. Now you defend the very woman who rejected you before the entire court. Yes. The word hung in the air, inexplicable and absolute. Valdemar's jaw clenched, and for a moment Elara saw the war happening behind those glacial eyes. Duty against desire, pride against the agony of the bond, tyranny against something that might have been the last shreds of his humanity. She lives, he said finally. Anyone who challenges this will answer to me personally. Are we clear? No one spoke, no one dared. Valdemar's eyes found Elara's, across the room, and in them she saw confusion that mirrored her own. He didn't understand why he was protecting her, any more than she understood why it made her heart ache instead of rejoice. The mate bond pulled taut between them, impossible to ignore, binding them tighter with every word spoken in her defense. It started just after midnight, when the temperature inside the castle dropped so suddenly that water froze mid-pour and breath turned to ice crystals in the air. Elara woke in her tower cell, no longer locked, but she hadn't tried to leave, to find frost coating every surface, creeping up the walls like living vines of crystalline death. The screaming started moments later. She ran to the window and looked down into the courtyard. Servants huddled together for warmth, their thin clothes offering no protection against the supernatural cold. Guards stamped their feet and blew into their hands, their armor conducting the freeze straight to their skin. In the distance, she could see the city beyond the castle walls, smoke writhing from thousands of fires that suddenly weren't enough to keep the cold at bay. And still the temperature fell. Lieutenant Kale burst through her door without ceremony, his face pale with more than cold. It's the king, the curse, it's accelerating. He's losing control. Elara's heart clenched. Take me to him. They found Valdemar in the throne room, and the sight stopped her breath. He stood in the center of the vast space, arms spread, ice spreading from his body in waves that turned the very air to winter. The ornate pillars were encased in glacial formations feet thick. The floor had become a skating rink of black ice. And Valdemar himself, he was barely recognizable. Frost covered half his face like a death mask, his eyes glowing so bright they hurt to look at directly. His skin had taken on a blue-white pallor, and when he moved, ice cracked and reformed around his joints like armor grown from his own freezing flesh. Valdemar! Elara shouted over the howling wind that had begun circling the throne room. His head turned slowly, as though the simple movement cost him everything. When he spoke, his voice was distorted, echoing with something inhuman. Run, princess, while you still can. I cannot hold it much longer. Even as he said it, another wave of cold exploded outward. Somewhere in the castle, glass shattered. In the city beyond, Alara knew people were dying, freezing in their beds, unable to escape the supernatural winter, consuming everything. She thought of the key still hidden in her chamber, thought of the southern gate that could carry her to freedom, thought of saving herself while thousands suffered for one man's curse. Then she thought her grandmother, wreathed in flames, who had probably faced a similar choice once upon a time. Alara dropped the cloak from her shoulders and let the heat in her blood rise to the surface. Her skin began to glow with soft red light, steam rising where her warmth met the frozen air. "No more running," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "If you're going to destroy this kingdom, you'll have to go through me first." She walked forward into the killing cove, and for the first time since the rejection, Valdemar looked at her with something other than rage or pain. He looked at her with hope. The hope lasted exactly 3 seconds before Valdemar's eyes rolled back and the last of his humanity vanished beneath the curse. The roar that tore from his throat was nothing human, a sound of pure winter fury that shattered what remained of the throne room's windows. His body convulsed, ice erupting from his skin in jagged spikes and crystalline armor. The crown on his head fused with the frost, becoming part of the monster he was transforming into. When his eyes opened again, they were solid blue light, with no recognition, no sanity, nothing but the primal need to freeze, to consume, to turn the world into an eternal winter tomb. He lunged. Alara didn't dodge. Instead, she ran forward to meet him, heat blazing across her skin until her entire body became a torch of living flame. They collided in the center of the throne room with a sound like thunder, fire meeting ice in an explosion that cracked the obsidian floor beneath them. Steam erupted in blinding clouds. The temperature swung wildly, freezing cold to burning heat and back again in seconds. Valdemar's claws, now actual talons of ice, raked toward her throat, but where they met her skin, they melted instantly, reforming only to melt again. "I'm not here to kill you," Alara shouted, even as she had to deflect another strike. "I'm here to save you, you stubborn froven bastard." He didn't hear her, couldn't hear her. The curse had taken him completely, turning the man into a force of nature that knew only destruction. So Alara did the only thing she could think of, the thing every instinct screamed against. She stopped defending and embraced him. Her arms wrapped around his freezing body, pulling him close even as ice tried to form across her skin. She pressed her burning forehead against his frozen chest and let every ounce of heat inside her pour out, not as a weapon, but as a lifeline. "Come back," she whispered against the ice. "You don't get to die and leave me with this bond. You don't get to make me care and then become a monster. Come back, Valdemar." The throne room began to shake. Cracks spider-webbed across the walls as fire and ice warred for dominance. The ancient citadel, which had stood for 1,000 years, groaned under the strain of two opposing magics trying to occupy the same space. Valdemar thrashed in her arms, ice spikes erupting and melting, his body trying desperately to freeze what it couldn't escape. But Alara held on, her fire burning hotter, refusing to let go even as the pain became excruciating. The citadel's foundations cracked. The ceiling began to collapse, and somewhere beneath the ice, deep in the frozen prison of his curse, Valdemar's heart began to beat warm again. His claws became hands. His roar became a gasp. Then his arms, slowly, shakingly, wrapped around her in return. "Alara," he breathed, and it was his voice, broken, raw, but human. "You came back." "I'm an idiot," she said, and didn't let go even if the world crumbled around them. When the dust finally settled, the throne room was unrecognizable. Half the ceiling had collapsed, letting dawn light pour through the destruction. The obsidian floor was cracked into 1,000 pieces, some sections still smoking with residual heat, while others glittered with melting ice. The throne itself had split cleanly down the middle, as though even it couldn't withstand what had just occurred. Alara and Valdemar knelt in the center of the devastation, still holding each other, both trembling from exhaustion and magic spent. The mate bond between them hummed with a new quality. Not the painful pull of rejection, but something balanced, settled, right. Valdemar pulled back first, and Alara saw him clearly for the first time since the curse had taken hold. The frost was gone from his skin. His eyes, though still faintly luminous, held human awareness again. But more than that, they held shame. "I almost killed you," he said hoarsely. "I almost killed everyone. But you didn't." Alara's hand came up to cup his face, and he leaned into the touch like a man starved for warmth. "We stopped it together." "No." He caught her wrist gently, then did something that made her breath catch. He pulled away and sank down onto one knee before her. The king of the frozen north, conqueror of 5 kingdoms, kneeling in the ruins of his throne room before a woman he'd tried to claim by force. His sword came free from its sheath with a soft rasp of metal. He laid it flat across his palms and offered it up to her, head bowed. "I have been a tyrant," Valdemar said, his voice carrying through the shattered throne room where his generals and court had begun to gather, drawn by the silence after the catastrophe. "I have mistaken conquest for connection, possession for partnership. I claimed you as though you were territory to be won, and in doing so, nearly destroyed us both." He lifted his eyes to meet hers, and they were clear, honest, humbled. "I offer you this blade, not as your master, but as your guardian. I offer you my crown, not as a gift, but as a shared burden. I offer you the mate bond, not as destiny you must accept, but as choice you deserve to mate freely." His voice dropped lower, meant only for her. "You saved my life, Alara. You saved my soul. I will spend the rest of my days proving worthy of that mercy, if you'll let me." Alara looked down at the sword, at the man offering it, at the court watching with bated breath. She thought of the girl who'd raised her hand in refusal just days ago, terrified of losing herself to someone else's power. She wasn't that girl anymore. "I accept," she said clearly, her voice ringing with authority that matched his own. "But not as your subject, and not as your prize. I accept as your equal, your partner, your queen in full right and power." She took the sword from his hands and raised it high, flames dancing along the blade without consuming it, fire and ice finally balanced. "The North has had kings long enough," Alara declared, looking out at the assembled court. "Now it has a queen who will not kneel, and any who challenge that will answer to both of us." Valdemar rose, and when he smiled, it transformed his entire face into something she'd never seen before. Genuine, unguarded joy. "The Felix Queen," he said softly. "Just like your grandmother." "No," Alara corrected, taking his hand. "Better than my grandmother. Because I choose this crown, I choose this bond, and I choose you, flaws, curse, and all." The mate bond blazed between them like the sun, and for the first time, neither of them tried to resist it.